Welcome back to the Eric Krown crypto channel as we turn the air conditioner on because it's getting too damn hot in this bitch right now. And there's plenty to talk about as we do play out the fake out that we were looking at yesterday and what that sort of means for the next few days to come, and especially opening up for this next week to come, as there are several setups in the midst. And then also a topic of today is going to be actually timing this next mean reversion bounce, of which, yes, I do think that Bitcoin has a nice big bounce-ola in mind here, and we're going to go over some statistically based way to judge when the bounce likely occurs. When bounce, sir. Anyways, with that in mind, I do want to humbly request that if you do find this content valuable, or if you just want to get back in a nice and free way, the easiest way to do that is to simply like the video. You can always dislike it later, and if you're feeling extra generous, maybe even share it as well. All right, so let's jump into it right here. Let's waste no more time, and let's follow up from the last 24 hours, right? Where we said, hey, Bitcoin likely has a trap situation going on right here, or fake out, whatever the fuck you want to call it, is good by me. And that was initiated by our multiple drafts of hidden bearish divergence all the way up to a 12-hour actually. There you go right there. 6-hour obviously had it as well, if we can actually load it. And then 4-hour had several drives. In fact, 1, 2, 3, 4 coming off of the last few highs right there. So ultimately that did drive our targets back down to the low side of the range. That's that test to just, I guess around like mid $28,000 region. And now the setup is actually going to be essentially based off of, well, CME. So CME is not trading over the weekend. So Bitcoin probably going to bounce over the weekend. In fact, I figure we're probably doing that right now, probably a little bit of upside, and we'll talk about targets in the short term here, but I really don't ever feel too confident on weekend price action. What I do feel quite compelled by is, of course, CME and the way that it closed for the weekly here. So CME did not just close below the major pivots that we're looking at, but also the momentum pivots as well. So we see right here with CME closing at 29,260, 12 hours stochastic momentum will open up to the downside coming into next week, assuming that, we stay below about 29,300. And the daily is postured right at the same way as well, 29,350 essentially. And what do you know? That is essentially within the context of the bearish control zone. So if we do see that tick back down, I would be looking for another grind to the downside to open up this next week to come. Again, short term, over the weekend, Bitcoin could very easily bounce. In fact, I think it's kind of doing that right now. Ultimately, though, this is very likely just corrective signal. So corrective within the context of our current trend would imply, would imply that Bitcoin probably doesn't make significantly lower lows on a closing basis, that is, meaning that I don't think that this move is going to actually trade below our current lows. I do think that those stay in for now, but we're probably going to test maybe even somewhere around there. So with that in mind, assuming that these conditions hold true, that's what I'd be aware of for this next week to come. Again, CME doesn't open until late Sunday, so realistically anytime between now and then is fair game. So let's now go into the short-term timeframes over here and talk about the short-term setups for Bitcoin. So in this case, do I have this chart already set up? Yes, I do. Hey, nice. All right, there we go. Anyways, Bitcoin on the short-term timeframes over the weekend here. Could we see a nice little bounce to open this one up? Yes, definitely. Anywhere, around mid 29s is fair game. I do have should actually be the 382. Yes, I know Fibonacci Nazis are watching right now, but I'm just using this for the projections to the downside, which we'll get into in a second here. But ultimately, Bitcoin, I expect over the weekend does something like this. Maybe gets a move all the way up there. Who knows? And then probably comes back down to start this next week. Anyways, until then, short-term timeframe stochastic momentum likely does give us the buys for this one. And let's just actually go through it right now. Starting up with the 4-hour. 4-hour is going to be showing downside momentum actually as long as Bitcoin's below 30,350. So to put this into context, Bitcoin can bounce all the way up, even to the 0.5 here, which is at 30,000 bucks, and also would be in alignment with our last few lower highs, and momentum would still actually be to the downside. Now, of course, this will change from closure to closure, but for right now, it does suggest that there is still downside pressure on Bitcoin, and at best probably going sideways over the weekend here. 6-hour also going to be showing, I believe, downside as well, as long as below 30,200. So keep these numbers in mind. Those are the momentum pivots for the time being. And then the 12-hour is also freshly down, rejecting the bullish control zone in this case. And by the way, this is not a corrective signal right here. This is likely a trending move signal right here, as we do see that the volatility the HVP of stochastic momentum is actually on the lows. So that plus fresh signal plus rejecting the bearish control zone does again make me bias towards some downside continuation, probably to start this next week. Again, as long as Bitcoin's below 30,250 in this case. So with all of that in mind, I imagine that very short-term timeframes over here are probably flippy floppy. Indeed, they are. Hourly is actually up as long as Bitcoin's above 28,900 or so. So ultimately, I'd just be looking for a bit of sideways over the weekend, and probably, if Bitcoin wants to test the upside, that's fine, as long as we're below, especially this descending trend line right here, which is governing the lower highs, and also even below a lot of those momentum pivots, which is 0.5. I do look for Bitcoin to likely trade lower before the next big bounce. How much lower would we likely go? Well, I'm kind of giving away my hands right here, because we actually do have a descending triangle in the making right now, and that would imply that any sort of even an hourly closure, although I typically like to use 4-hour time frames, especially when looking at a little bit of a bigger move, any sort of a 4-hour closure below the bottom side of this structure, which is about 28,600 or so, basically just the low of the 18th of May, which is 28,600, apologies. Sleep still elusive right now, and that would imply a measured move all the way down here, which is about $27,000, also in alignment with the 1.618 Fibonacci extension. So good confluence right there. If Bitcoin does initiate that move, again, I doubt it happens over the weekend. Weekend probably going to be a bit of a bounce, and then if it wants to play it out, probably early next week. I will be wrong on this, or at least Bitcoin will be, initiating a much greater bounce if this next condition does happen, and that would be with basically any sort of a tick above yesterday's high. I think will very likely do it, which is 30,700. At that point, I would be looking for that move towards about 32 to 32,500. That number is going to be very, 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 very important coming up here, so keep that one in mind. But other than that, I should also denote that in alignment with this potential descending triangle right here, which is one of the only formations that I actually think even works, to be fair, we do see that naturally the daily stochastic momentum for actually spot price action will turn back down. Hey, guess what? If we actually close below that region. The reason why, though, that I'm not going to be calling like an official retest to our current lows or even new lows from where we're currently at is simply this. Daily BBWP is essentially redlined, and whenever I see something like that, I'm looking for corrective signals at worst, or most likely, I would say. So in this case, I don't think that Bitcoin has the momentum nor the sort of juice built up in order to really break below our current lows for right now. Later on, maybe maybe late in the summer, is that going to be a possibility? Yeah, absolutely. But for right now, I don't think that that's like my main idea of price action here. Anyways, now let's get into the fun stuff. So I said at the beginning of this video that we're going to talk about sort of timing this next sort of bounce, because I've been talking about this chart over here, and the likelihood of a major bounce, a 30 to maybe 31 to almost 38% bounce, I do believe, which could put Bitcoin as high as $35,000. And timing of this bounce is something that I've actually missed, even though we've spoken about this many times. So let me just roll through this as quickly as possible. But basically, we're coming back here to this dreaded 5-day volatility versus momentum chart. Basically, to explain it, volatility is the measurement of the dispersion of returns. We use BBWP for this particular purpose. It's one of my favorite indicators of all time, and you can find it freely in the TradingView library, by the way. Anyways, anytime that we do see it come down to the mid-teen percentiles, the expansion move from there has led to an average move of about 45% done over the course of 40 days. We saw that happen most recently off that last $45,000 to $48,000 high. That was giving us a major downside bias in the last month or so, or the last 2 months basically since April, and we saw that move play out all the way down to about $25,000. That's 47% down, and done over the course of 40 days. Very much in alignment with the last several iterations of the past couple of years here. The focus now, however, is on the mean reversion that typically happens after that move. So what I mean by that is, for example, in this case, in May, after that first major move to the downside, you do see a pretty impressive bounce, in this case, over the next 10 days, about, a little bit over 30%. Anyways, I've gone through and measured all of these, and I've documented the results over here, which you can see for yourself. And if we include all of the prior ones, it's about 31.1% counter move after the general move, like the real move based off of those indicators. And then if we only include the downside moves, which by the way, this one obviously was, this last one in this case, it was about just over 38%. That would put Bitcoin respectively somewhere around about 32.5 to 33, and as much as maybe a little bit over $35,000. And then I've also averaged out the days that it takes from that to play out as well. And that was about basically 15. I mean, yes, we had one iteration that was 10. That was actually the first one, but you can see that 15 comes up here many times. Anyways, what I want to take, what I missed here, or what I haven't spoken about yet at least, is that what I've noticed to judge the timing of that bounce is actually quite simple. Just like we used the 5-day stochastic momentum oscillator to judge when, or the direction of that volatility expansion, which has been working absolutely perfect for the past few years here. Doesn't mean that it always will, of course, but in this case, after we get the counter cross from that initial signal, the bounce typically does occur in the next 5 to 10 days or so. Anyways, in this case, I'll give you an example. So this one, again, going back to May, we see, or this one's not as clear. Let's go to this one right here. We see this one over here starting in July. So this was a big bad bear trap coming out of the summer, right? Bitcoin has a nice about 42.18% move to the upside done over the course of 40 days. Sounds fucking familiar, doesn't it? And then what do you know? When you see right here, and I'm going to mark it off, when you see the 5-day stochastic momentum officially cross the downside, guess what? That's actually where the counter move happens, right from there. So in this case, let me actually just get rid of this now that you know the example. This is consistent amongst all of them. Again, we can show this one right here, coming off of this high. I'll just mark it off so that you can see. Okay, there we go. Crosses to the downside, and oh, what do you know? Bitcoin comes down soon after that. Very interesting. Anyways, in this case, we can once again forecast the price action that would be needed in order to force the 5-day stochastic momentum oscillator back onto the upside. In the next 5-day period, which by the way, it just closed, it would now be 32,000 and about 400, which is essentially the our range highs right now on your somewhat like higher term time, basically your daily. Anyways, in this case, do I think that Bitcoin's going to do in this next 5-day session? Unlikely. Again, if we combine it with the average days over here, we probably look, we're probably looking like early June, which is only really 10 days away. And I imagine that within that next 10 days, we're very likely going to see this one reset a little bit more in the next 5-day closing basis. This will come down significantly more yet again. I would even imagine maybe even all the way down to 30,000 bucks. And then if we do see a closure above there on the relevant time frame after that, that's going to very likely be the next sort of major indication, at least to myself, that statistically speaking, historically speaking, it's much more likely to bounce to the upside. And then we get to play the game of, is this just a bounce or is this wrecked? It's everyone's favorite game, right? Because traditionally speaking, I wouldn't wait, or I would wait until we get the next sort of like full on setup on the 5-day BBWP to get like the next major 45% move, statistically speaking. And that's not going to be happening anytime soon because that is all the way up at like above 70 percentile, and we really need to see it come down to like below 20 percentile, which would naturally take a lot of time. All right, cool. So with wrapping everything up here, short term, does Bitcoin play a bit sideways, maybe even test some upside? Definitely possible. Again, I never really have strong ideas over the weekend. If it does, 618 right here, or 302, depending upon which we look at it, it's about 29.6 or so. Anywhere around there is fair game. If things really get crazy, the 0.5. If and when Bitcoin starts to get above the 0.5, that's when I'd start to really consider that this is actually going to be one, I guess, another fucking fake out to the upside right here. Or maybe I'm just getting faked out at that point. Time to go back to the drawing board, I suppose. Or really anywhere higher than yesterday's high, which was 30,700 or so. That would be really good enough for me to look for, 32 plus, and obviously that would play into the 5-day signature, which I think is unlikely, but hey, that's what I'd be looking for if that were to happen. At the same time, what I think is most likely to happen, probably around early this coming week, is, play sideways here, and then any sort of a closure, or really even a trade below that 18th of May low, although it would be rather aggressive, meaning that it does have more risk naturally. That would complete the descending triangle. Also, a nice measured move, and the Fibonacci extension at the 1.618 at about 27,000 bucks, anywhere around there's fair game. That would be closing on new lows. However, at that point, you have to imagine that Bitcoin would naturally have on the daily regular bullish divergence, as our last lows were way over here, and Bitcoin even came down and closed around even just below like 27.5. You would naturally have that. So in the short term, this one's likely to trade sideways, I imagine, and then we probably get resolution this next coming week. Other than that, the big thing that I really want to focus this video on was what we spoke about over here. I think that's actually most important because the short term I'm not super solid on, especially after this past week. That was a pretty intense week, so it's time to just sit back and relax, in my opinion. Anyways, other than that, I want to remind you that Instagram, I've been making a more concerted effort to be more active there. If you're interested, if you happen to give a fuck, there is a link in the description below. Any other account that is not that account is a scammer, and probably shouldn't, do business with them, whatever the fuck they're going to ask of you. Other than that, should let you know about Bybit as well. Yep, the good old Bybit shell. Do have a link for Bybit in the description below. As always, when it comes to leverage exchanges, I want to suggest that, hey, while they can be amazing for people who actually have a strategy, if you do not already have a strategy that you have backtested, that you know these statistics that go alongside, I would strongly recommend not doing that. It's very unwise to do any sort of trading, whether leverage or not, unless if you actually have tested your strategy, which you can do on our application over here for free, by the way, on the Krown trading application in the trading journal. You can do that on Excel. You can do that on pen and paper. It's all good. Whatever you decide, whatever's most relevant to you, go for that. It's just most important that you actually test your strategy so that you know what it is most likely to do. And then maybe use a tested account, which actually Bybit does have. So I massively support that. And I think I'll leave it off right there. I'll wish you well. Take care and see you soon.